week 15 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units. I have his sleepers this week. The first one, the Los Angeles Rams. So the Rams, as a streaming option, I think they're a decent option this week with a good matchup versus the Commanders that give up the 5th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I know the Commanders do move the football up and down the field, but they turn the football over a whole lot as well. So the last few weeks for this Rams defense, week 12 at Arizona, 14 points allowed, 4 sacks. Week 13 versus the Browns, 19 points allowed, 2 sacks, an INT and a safety. And then last week in a tough matchup versus a great Baltimore offense, 37 points allowed, 2 sacks, an interception, and a safety. So this week they're back home is Los Angeles. You know, you got Aaron Donald, still one of the premier pass rushers in the game. And this offense of the Washington Commanders, it's been hit or miss this season. Points on the board and yards, but they do turn the football over a lot. And they got a bad offensive line where Sam Howell's taking beatings this season. 4 or 5 sacks in a game. So this week the Rams, while they're available in 81% of fantasy leagues, I think they're decent sleeper DST this week. The next one's the Chicago Bears. So the Bears over the last few weeks, I know they're another DST that gives up points, but they turn the football over as well. And they found double-digit fantasy points the last few weeks here in Chicago. Week 11 at Detroit, a solid game. 29 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery. Week 12 at Minnesota, 10 points allowed, 2 sacks, 4 interceptions. And then last week versus Detroit, once again, a monster game, 13 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. So right now, since they got Montez Sweat at the trade deadline, this Bear defense is going out there and they're making plays. Like I said, they're going to give up their points, but they're still getting sacks. They're creating turnovers. And this week, a good matchup with the Browns that give up the 7th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So this Chicago Bear team, I think, are going to get pressure on Joe Flacco. I know Flacco's got a good arm, but he's a statue back there in the pocket. Once you get a hand on him, he's going to go down. And we know he's been a turnover-prone quarterback over the last few seasons. Like I said, he's playing good football, but he's still going to turn the football over. And if you get a hand on him, you're going to get a sack. So they give up the 7th most points to DSTs. And I think the Bears, once again, could be a decent option. Available right now, 92% of fantasy leagues. And the third and final defense, DST, I have as a sleepers, the Tennessee Titans. So the Tennessee Titans, I know, hasn't been great this season on the defensive side of the ball, but the last few weeks, they've actually played some good football and created turnovers. Available in 94% of fantasy leagues. Week 12 versus Carolina, 10 points allowed, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 13 versus Indianapolis, 31 points allowed in that game, but had 3 sacks and 2 fumble recoveries. And week 14 at the Dolphins, a game where they hung around in that one and pulled it out at the end with a shocking victory. 21 points allowed, 5 sacks, a fumble recovery, and a block kick. So right now, Tennessee, they've won 2 out of 3 ball games. They beat a good Miami team. And this week in a matchup versus the Texans, where it's possibly C.J. Stroud or Davis Mills, we got to wait and see who's going to play in this ball game. It's going to come down to the wire. I think they still could get pressure on either quarterback. Is this Tennessee defense? They played way better at home than they have on the road this season. And this week with a home game and rejuvenated confidence after a big victory last week, I think this defense could go out there and make this a tight type of ball game. So if you need a sleeper DST, they're available, like I said, in tons of leagues at 94%. So that's a few defense DST units I have as sleepers for week 15 of the fantasy football season.